Welcome back to the Mind of Brandon. Today we're going to continue our Bible study. As indicated by the title of this video, I'm going to be talking about Moses and his Volcano God. Now, to recap, in the video just prior to this one, I talked about the 12 sons of Jacob, who of course fathered the 12 tribes of Israel. And so we saw the beginning of a pretty significant Israelite presence in the land of Egypt. And this just might have set the stage for a historical Shemitic-speaking dynasty in Egypt known as the Hyksos. That's not what they called themselves. That's a Greek way of referring to this dynasty, which was eventually overthrown during an Egyptian rebellion led by a guy called Yamos, whose name means born of Yah, Yah being an Egyptian moon god. So Yamos was a very important pharaoh. He's the founder of the 18th dynasty. He set in motion a period of Egyptian history known as the New Kingdom. And the story that we're going to be talking about today, the story of Moses, takes place during this New Kingdom of ancient Egypt. That said, the story of Moses begins in the first chapter of the book of Exodus. It takes place many years after the first Israelites arrive in Egypt. So there's a new pharaoh who never knew Jacob or any of his sons, and he decides that the best way to handle these Israelites is to enslave them. They're reproducing like crazy, their population is increasing quite rapidly. He begins to fear an overthrow and decides to order an infanticide. So there's a Hebrew child that is placed in a basket and sent to drift down a river, only to be rescued by an Egyptian princess who names the child Moses because she drew him from the water. This, of course, is an example of Hebrew folk etymology, or in other words, the author is using Hebrew reasons to explain why this Egyptian princess named the child Moses. Technically, Moses is not what this character was actually originally called. That's kind of a customary way of referring to him. Moses is really the Greek adaptation of the Hebrew Moshe, which is actually believed by Egyptologists to be of Egyptian origin, comes from the Egyptian word mos, as we saw in the name Yamos, born of Yah, born of the moon god Yah. There's also a Kamos, born of Ka. There's a Tothmos, born of the god Toth. Ramos, born of the sun god Ra, more customarily known as Ramosis or Ramses, right? There's a bunch of different Ramses in the New Kingdom of ancient Egypt, right? But anyway, one of the things I've talked quite a bit about in previous videos is how there are certain motifs that have been handed down to biblical tradition from pagan tradition. And the baby in the basket motif is a great example of this. This is seen across several different cultures. It goes all the way back to Sargon of Akkad. Sargon founded what is known as the Akkadian Empire. One of the things I've talked quite a bit about in previous videos is a people known as the Sumerians and how their land was subject to many different waves of Shemitic invasions. The first of these was a culture that came to be known as the Akkadians. Okay? That said, Sargon of Akkad, that's another one of these customary names. Sargon is really the Greek adaptation of the Akkadian name Sharukin. And Sharukin has an autobiography for us, talking about how his mother was a priestess, his father was not known. As a babe, he was put in a basket, sent to drift down a river. He was rescued by an individual called Aki, the water drawer. This individual raised Sharukin as their own and then appointed him as gardener. So it's pretty similar to the baby in a basket story that we see with Moses. But anyway, the first important thing that happens to Moses after he grows up is he murders an Egyptian and becomes a fugitive. He flees the land of Egypt to the land of Midian, which is located on the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. And it's there that he marries a woman that is the daughter of a guy called Jethro, the priest of Midian. And one day, while Moses is tending flocks in the wilderness, he wanders in the vicinity of a holy mountain that's referred to in Exodus chapter 2 as the Mountain of God. And by chapter 2, what I actually mean is chapter 3. This is, of course, pretty common in antiquity that a god or the gods are associated with this mountain or that mountain, right? And this mountain has gone by the name Horeb, but it's also gone by the name Sinai. And Sinai can be seen as a customary pronunciation of the mountain. Maybe it's supposed to actually be Sinai or Sinai. Sinai, by the way, is actually a Hebrew word that means bush, which is probably precisely why we have a story about Moses encountering a burning bush at this mountain that starts speaking to him. Okay, the idea is it's God speaking to Moses through this burning bush, which leaves me kind of scratching my head, wondering, why is God needing to speak to someone through a burning bush? But anyway, when this burning bush is speaking to Moses, or when God is speaking to Moses as a burning bush, he tells him, hey, look, Moses, you still got some Israelite brethren back in Egypt. You got to go set those mofos free, yo. So Moses is kind of curious, well, which God is this that's even talking to me, right? So he asks him, so who are you? What's your name, right? And he explains, his explanation is kind of awkward. He explains in a variety of different ways which God he is. He has to clarify for Moses who he actually is. And what he says initially is, I am who I am, or I am what I am, I will be what I will be. I don't know, it's been translated in different ways, and I do question our translations on this particular one. But, like I said, he does clarify who he is. He says that he's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He revealed himself to Abraham as El Shaddai. I talked about that designation in previous videos. It means God of the mountains. This is an epithet that goes all the way back to the original El from Canaanite mythology, because he's perceived to live far away up in the mountains, right? And he's actually closely associated with a particular mountain called Sapon, or Zaphon. It can be pronounced either way. But God explains to Moses that his name Yahweh is not one that he revealed to Abraham. This is apparently a name that Abraham did not know, which I think makes it look kind of like a discrepancy, because we did actually see this name Yahweh quite a bit throughout the Bible, even in the story of Abraham. Abraham refers to him as Yahweh or Yahweh Elohim. There's other characters that call him that. Yahweh, of course, is commonly translated as the Lord or the Lord God. We really only see him referred to as El Shaddai once. But hey, if I'm pointing out discrepancies, maybe I'm just looking too far into it. Really, I think the main point the author's trying to make here is that El Shaddai and Yahweh are the same God. And this, of course, is an important point to make if you want to bridge two different subcultures that know their gods by two different names, right? This, of course, is actually something that's pretty common phenomena in antiquity, that when two originally distinct gods come to be considered the same God. We call that syncretism. The best examples of this, of course, are found in the Greco-Roman tradition, where you have gods like Neptune and Poseidon. Neptune's originally a river god, Poseidon's a sea god, but they come to be considered the same god, right? There's Venus and Aphrodite come to be considered the same goddess, right? So the most well-known examples come from Greco-Roman tradition, but it's really happening pretty much all across the map. Egyptian gods often syncretize with each other. They often syncretize with Greek or Canaanite gods. Canaanite gods often syncretize with Hittite and Hurrian gods. Hittite, Hurrian gods syncretize with each other. Canaanite, Hittite, Hurrian gods syncretize with Babylonian and Sumerian gods. Babylonian and Sumerian gods syncretize with each other, etc. So it looks like Yahweh might actually in origin be a Midianite god specifically. And of course the god of the Israelites would be El. We have that story that I talked about in the video just prior to this one, where Jacob gets into a wrestling match with the god El, and then El renames Jacob Israel, right? And there's different epithets for El Shaddai, El Elyon, Elohim, okay? So really it looks like this story is a way of syncretizing the God of the Israelites with the God of the Midianites. But to make a long story short, God gives Moses the ability to perform miracles, so he heads off to Egypt. He performs all these miraculous acts to free the Israelites from their enslavement, and so, he and the Israelites wander off. There's this famous scene where they come to, it's either the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, something like that, and Moses miraculously parts the waters. He and the Israelites cross. The Pharaoh's army is chasing after them, and they try to cross, but then the waters come crashing down and destroy them. By the way, In Egyptian folklore, there's a legendary king called Sneferu who appears in a story just kind of chilling in a boat with a concubine of his, and she drops her brooch in the water, and he says, don't worry about it, I'll get you a new one. And she says, no, it's got to be that one. You gave it to me. It's special, right? So Sneferu magically parts the waters, and he gets the brooch back for his concubine. It's actually kind of a cute story, right? But, I mention this because I have this sneaking suspicion, just based off the fact that there's been so many other pagan things that have been handed down to the Bible. Well, maybe that's where they got the idea of Moses parting the waters. That said, there's actually an example from actual Egyptian history, something that's kind of reminiscent to this story. Technically, it's Hittite history. Okay, so here's the situation, right? There's this battle between the Hittites and the Egyptians taking place in the Holy Land, the land of Canaan, basically. And there's actually, Canaanite people who are present there. They're basically jockeying for control of this region. And the Egyptians and the Hittites actually record the events differently. According to Egyptian records, Ramses II is left alone. His men ditch him, basically. They run away. They're cowards. And so he's left to fend for himself against all these Hittites. And, he's so godly and awesome, he just single-handedly wipes out all these Hittites. Pretty stupid, actually. But in the Hittite version of events, the Hittites actually wind up losing the Egyptians. They're being chased by the Egyptians, and they lose them at the Orontes River. So you got all these Egyptians drowning in this river, and there's actually this ancient piece of artwork. It shows these people holding this guy upside down, shaking the water out of his lungs. Right? It's kind of funny, actually. But basically, I suspect that the story of the situation where the Hittites lost the Egyptians at the Orontes River, I have a sneaking suspicion that was probably influential on our story about Moses and the Israelites losing the Pharaoh's army at the Red Sea, or the Sea of Reeds, whatever it is. But anyway, after the Pharaoh's army is destroyed, the Israelites all burst into song. They just kind of miraculously all apparently know the same words to the song. It's like a scene from a musical, actually. It's kind of silly. But one of the things they talk about in this song is the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. And they talk about how it was it was built by the God's own hands, and how it's a place reserved for his own dwelling. This kind of reinforces the point I was making earlier about gods being associated with mountains. Mountains are often considered homes for the gods. A mountain is a god's house. Later in the Bible, I think it's the book of Isaiah, we even see the biblical God. We hear his mountain is referred to as his house. I think it's called Mount Zion in that particular book. But what I'm trying to get across here is there's no exception for the biblical God. He too is perceived to live in a mountain. Okay, and to get to this mountain, Moses and the Israelites are following a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. I want you to think about the implications of this a second. They're on their way to Mount Sinai. Okay? What they are following to get to Mount Sinai is a pillar. Okay? They're following a pillar to get to Mount Sinai. It appears during the day as cloud, and during the night it appears as fire. And when they arrive at the mountain, it is quaking and smoking and making loud, thunderous noises, and God descends upon it in fire. Obviously, it's a volcano. Right? Now, if you look at some map or something like that, you're going to see a little peninsula between mainland Egypt and Saudi Arabia, identified as the Sinai Peninsula. It's named after a mountain on that peninsula, which is named after the mountain in the Bible, but yet at the same time it's not the same mountain. Right? Basically, it's my understanding that the Roman Emperor Constantine, his mother Saint Helena, decided to go identify a bunch of biblical sites. She came across this mountain on the Sinai Peninsula. It's a non-volcanic mountain. And she arbitrarily decides, oh, well, this must be Mount Sinai from the Bible. She's wrong. Okay? That's what I'm trying to get across here. That's not right. Most Bible scholars will tell you that's not right. And so there have been attempts to identify the real Mount Sinai. There's a guy called Ron Wyatt who will tell you that it's a mountain in Saudi Arabia called Jebel Alaz. I think that's supposed to mean like Mountain of Almonds or something like that. But yeah, he shows pictures of this. It's a non-volcanic mountain with a scorched top, and he talks about here's the evidence that this mountain is the biblical Mount Sinai. In my personal opinion, though, this looks like a hoax. And I'm kind of the attitude that Ron Wyatt is an archaeological hoaxer. There have been people from his archaeological teams that have come forward and said, yeah, this guy is full of shit. He's a hoaxer. Right? That said, there's a book that I do recommend you check out. You can check it out from the library, buy it, whatever. It's called Miracles of the Exodus. It's written by a guy called Colin Humphreys. And I think that Humphreys does a good job of demonstrating that the biblical Mount Sinai is probably actually the largest volcano in Saudi Arabia, which is called Mount Bader. Now in a previous video, the video on the legend of Abraham, I was talking about a guy called Nabonidus. He's the final ruler of the Chaldean Empire, and he actually moved the capital of that empire from Babylon over to Saudi Arabia, okay, where moon worship was more popular. Nabonidus, of course, was a moon worshipper, right? His moon god was the god Sin, right? Now, if there was a mountain of sin, what would we call it? Sinai or Sini, something like that, right? The same or roughly the same as the Hebrew word for bush. Right. Now, for those of you who are having trouble picking up what I'm putting down here, right, I'll clarify. Okay. The way I make sense of this is that this mountain would have been called at the time, Sinai or Sini, something like that, right? Mountain of the moon god, the moon god Sin, right? And so when Hebrews come along, Mount Sini, mountain, Mount Bush, what? Right? And so they would have come up with, they would have had some Hebrew folk etymology to explain why it's called Mount Bush. And so that's why we get this story of Moses and the burning bush, right? That said, to this day, Mount Bader is still associated with the moon. The name Bader is Arabic for full moon, right? So, on top of that, Colin Humphreys points out in his book that just as there are 12 ceremonial stone pillars placed at the base of Mount Sinai in the Bible, Mount Bader actually had 12 ceremonial stone pillars placed at its base. And he goes over all sorts of other evidence, connecting the biblical Mount Sinai to Mount Bader. I'm not going to go over all of it. You guys can check out the book. You really should check out the book. But anyway, the conclusion I think we can safely come to here, and I don't think Colin Humphreys would necessarily word it this way, but I think the conclusion we can come to here is that the God of Moses is a volcano god. And so I'm going to leave you guys with that. You can share your thoughts down in the comment section below. Let me know what you think. That said, that's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Maybe even share it with other people. If you're interested in watching my future videos, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. In my next video, I'm going to be fast forwarding to the books of Samuel to discuss the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. So I hope to see you all there. Thank you for watching. Peace and have a good one.